your certification today, and it take you 6 weeks or less to get certified. And the really great thing is if you get your PMP or CAPM, it shows employers that you understand the methodology of how to manage projects, and it is just as valuable as getting a degree and take you way less time and money and effort to get it. So here is what you are going to learn today. I'm going to show you how the PMP and CAPM certification can help you in your career and help you land your dream job. I'm going to show you how to read the process chart from the PMBOK 6th edition guide properly. I'm going to teach you a trick to help you remember the ITTOs from the PMBOK guide 10x faster. If you have looked at the PMBOK before, you know that there's 500, 600 different ITTOs in there. Don't freak out. I'm going to show you how to simplify this and make it really easy to understand. I'm going to show you how to fill in your PMP application and write your project descriptions. And I'm going to show you how to approach those tricky situational questions where you don't know what the correct answer may be. And then I'm going to give you the exact study plan on how you can get your PMP or CAPM certification in the next 6 weeks or less. So we have a lot of great information to cover today. Now, before we jump into that, let me ask you, can you relate to this? Do you ever find that the PMBOK is so tough to read? Give me a yes in the chat box if you can relate to any of this. Or do you ever just tell yourself, I really want to get certified, but I just don't have the time to study, and something in life just always pops up? Give me a yes if you ever felt like that. Or you just feel extremely overwhelmed. I mean, the PMBOK is over 600 pages and you just don't know what the first step would be to getting your certification. Or maybe you've been studying for a long time now and you're really scared of failing your exam. Or lastly, you just don't know how you can balance all the other commitments you have with getting certified, your home life, your work, your studies. You just don't know how to balance all of that and really find the proper amount of time to dedicate to this and study. Give me a yes if you felt like this before. If you felt like any of these, I have good news for you because you are not alone. A lot of people feel like this, and I'm going to show you a simple method to kind of simplify your studying and make it super easy for you to get certified. In fact, I often have test takers tell me that after they read the PMBOK, they're totally confused and have no idea what they read. Tell me if this is you. Like if you read the PMBOK before, you'll know what I mean. And this is an actual email that I got from a student. How the beep do I remember any of this? Helena, I read everything and they all sound the same. I read the whole thing and learn nothing because it's all so confusing in my head. Because let's face it, the PMP exam is not the easiest exam in the world. There's a lot of technical terms, there's a lot of jargons involved. But the good news is I'm going to show you the fastest route to getting certified. I want to change your route to getting certified from this windy road filled with roadblocks into a straight path where you know exactly what to do and you can get certified in 6 weeks or less. Now, just a little bit about me. My name is Helena and I am the founder of Exams PM. I've been running this business for the past 6 years and we teach PMP certified professionals from all over the world. I started teaching locally, so here are some pictures of my local classes. We started being very small, just a couple people in our classes. And in the past 6 years, we have grew a community of over 100,000 people from all around the world. So you're definitely in safe hands. We have helped thousands of people obtain their PMP certification. And once they have obtained this certification, they actually told us what a difference they made for their career. So for example, Peter says here that having a combination of hard and soft skills coupled with academic degrees opened doors for him, and the PMP continued to be a sought-after credential when he was in the job market. Patricia here says that when she was trying to change jobs, she got a lot of good opportunities and interviews because a lot of employers are looking for the PMP credential. And as you may know, more and more employers are using automated resume screeners, so they're not even going to look at your resume unless you have the PMP keyword on your resume for a lot of project management jobs. And then Brian here says that getting his PMP certification really helped him get hired for jobs. It allowed him to meet other people at PMI activities and events, and it gave him the extra credibility when he was dealing with clients to be able to put the PMP credential on his resume and email signatures and LinkedIn and so forth. And in fact, when you combine the PMP with another certification such as IDLE, Microsoft, Red Hat, etc., you can see the salary goes up by 10 to 20%. And the PMP is especially popular in IT fields. And the difference between the PMP certified and non-PMP certified project manager is a difference about 10 to 20% difference in salary, which in the 6 major countries where PMP certified project managers are most prevalent, the reported salary advantage is that the PMP certified project managers earn on average $10,000 more per year than the non-PMP certified project managers. So if you want to work in the project management field, it is super important for you to get certified. Another reason why it's important to be certified is that 10% of all of the project manager positions out there listed actually require the candidate to be PMP certified. So this was done by Indeed.com and SimplyHire.com. So they looked at all of the project manager job postings on their site, and they found that 10.4% of those positions actually required the candidate to be PMP certified. And this number is even higher if you're looking at IT project managers or project managers in government and financial industries. So if you want to work in any of those fields, then you're not automatically not qualified for 10% plus of job opportunities just by not getting the certification that will take you 6 weeks or less to get. And the reason why employers are looking for candidates who have these certifications is because the PMP makes you a better perceived project manager. And here's what I mean by that. If I was the HR manager and I had thousands of resumes I had to screen through to fill for my project manager positions that I'm trying to fill, then I want those qualifiers that tells me that this candidate knows what they're talking about. And PMP is an easy qualifier that indicates to me that you understand a proven methodology on how to run a project successfully. It also shows me that you're dedicated to the project management profession because you have spent the time and money to go through this certification process. And this makes you look like a better perceived project manager on paper. So it's going to get you your foot in the door. Now that we talked about all of the benefits of becoming a PMP certified project manager, you're probably wondering, how do I do this for myself? Well, let's dive right into the exam information. There's 2 ways that you can qualify to write your PMP certification. So if you have a bachelor's degree or higher, so master's degree, PhD, etc., then you just need 3 years of project management experience plus 4,500 hours of leading and directing projects. So you need both of these requirements. If you have a high school diploma, then you need a bit more work experience in order to qualify for your PMP. So you need 5 years of work experience in this case, plus 7,500 hours of leading and directing projects. In both scenarios, you need 35 contact hours. So these contact hours are your formal project management education hours, which we can provide you here at Exams PM. Let me give you a bit more information about the exam. So the exam is 200 multiple choice questions. Each of those questions have 4 possible choices. There are 175 questions that are marked and 25 questions that are unmarked, but they won't tell you which of those 25 questions are unmarked. You have 4 hours to complete the exam. You can take as many breaks as you like, but every break that you take will count towards your exam time. And it's a pass or fail exam. You're not not going to get your score at the end, so they're not going to tell you you got 81%, for example. They're just going to tell you whether you passed or failed. And because there are 5 process groups in the PMBOK guide, which is what the PMP exam is based on, they're going to tell you whether you're proficient, moderately proficient, or below proficient in each of the 5 process groups, which are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. And finally, if English isn't your first language, then I would suggest getting a language aid, which will allow you to get the test questions in one of these following languages plus English, so it will just help you understand those tricky situational questions a bit more. Here is how the PMP exam is broken down. What I want you to note from this breakdown is that most of the questions are in the planning, executing, and monitoring, controlling process groups. So this is where you want to focus your time on. Now, because PMI doesn't release the passing score for the PMP exam, that's probably the #1 question that we get asked. So what I can tell you is that the last time that PMI did release a passing score, it was back when it was the PMBOK 4th edition, and it used to be 61%. And before that, it used to be 68% a long time ago. So my best guess is that the passing score for the PMP exam is still in between 61 to 68%. And so on your practice exams, you should be aiming for at least 70% to feel confident enough to go into your exam. I would actually suggest aiming for 80% or higher on your practice exams before you walk into your actual exam. Now, another question that I get is, well, Helena, what if I don't have the necessary work experience in order to qualify for my PMP exam? And that is why we have the CAPM exam as well. In order to qualify for your CAPM certification, you don't need work experience. You just need your high school diploma plus 23 contact hours. So that's 23 hours of formal project management education. Or if you don't want to do the education portion, you can just have your high school diploma plus 1,500 hours of work experience in general. So if you don't have the necessary work experience in order to qualify for your PMP, you can always get the CAPM certification. It'll be good for 5 years. And then once you do have the work experience, then you can qualify for the PMP. The good thing about both of these certifications is that they're both based on the PMBOK guide. So you can study for both of these exams simultaneously. Really the key difference is the amount of work experience that you have to determine which exam you will take. And the CAPM exam is much more closely based on the PMBOK guide, whereas the PMP exam, you will see a lot more situational questions, which we're going to get into how to handle those later on during this presentation. All right, now that we covered all the basic exam information, now you know how the exam works, how you can qualify, etc. Now let's dive into what you'll actually see on the exam. So the backbone of the PMP exam is really the PMBOK guide, and right now it's the PMBOK 6th edition guide, and the quote-unquote skeleton of the PMBOK guide is the process chart that you see here. And I'm going to help you understand how to memorize this process chart in the next 10 minutes. So you're in for a treat here. So it's really important that you understand how to read this chart properly, which not many people do because they just see a whole bunch of terms on here and it's hard to interpret that. But once you understand how to read this chart, you will understand PMI's methodology for how to manage projects. So across the columns, across the top here, you have your 5 process groups. And the process group is another way for PMI to say the timeline of projects. So at the start of your project, you initiate it. Once the project has been initiated, then you plan for it. Once the planning is done, then you execute it. Once the execution is done, then you monitor and control it to make sure everything is going according to plan. And once the project is finished, you move into the closing process group. So this really shows you the timeline of the project. And across the rows here, we have our 10 knowledge areas, which are integration, scope, schedule, cost, quality, resource, communications, risk, procurement, and stakeholders. And you can really think of these as different categories or buckets that you can group these processes in. You have all of the tasks related to scope, all of the tasks related to cost, etc. So these are different buckets or categorizations that you can group the processes in. So, and then in the intersection between the knowledge area and the process groups, you have your 49 processes. So each of these 49 processes has a corresponding knowledge area and process groups. The knowledge area shows you which bucket of tasks they belong in, and the process group shows you when they happen in the project. And as we have been trained to do in school, we're really used to reading charts from left to right, which is how we normally read a paper or so forth, but that's actually not the right way to read the process chart. The proper way that you want to read this proper process chart is up and down, because you have to connect the dots of how this project is going to be completed first. So we start at the top as initiating. So we develop our project charter first, which initiates our project, and then we identify our stakeholders. So we have to complete the task in initiating first before we can move on to planning, where we develop our project management plan. We define our scope, we plan our schedule, we budget our project, etc., etc. And then we move on to execution and so forth. So we have to do it in the right timeline. So when we read this chart, we have to go up and down first to really connect how all of these 49 processes connect in a sequence in order to complete the project. And because most people are reading left to right, they can't see how this project is connected from start to finish, and this causes a lot of confusion to candidates. Okay, now that you know how to interpret this chart and you know how to dissect this chart, let's talk about how to memorize it. So the PMP and the CAPM exam are not memorization exams. However, there are a couple things that are good to have memorized, such as the 10 knowledge areas. So one quick trick to help you memorize the 10 knowledge areas is by using phrases that begin with the same first letters as the 10 knowledge areas. So the 10 knowledge areas, again, are integration, scope, schedule, cost, quality, resources, communications, risk, procurement, and stakeholder. And the phrase that I like to use to memorize the 10 knowledge areas is, I saw 6 cars quickly rip Carol's rear passenger side. And we can see is that the first letters of this phrase matches with the same first letters of the 10 knowledge areas. And when you memorize this phrase, it's going to jog your memory as to what the 10 knowledge areas are. This works because our brains work by association. So when you memorize something that you already know and associate it with something you don't know, you're going to be able to memorize the thing that you don't know much faster. And if you don't like that particular phrase, here are some other ways that you can use to memorize the 10 knowledge areas. You just have to pick the phrase that you like the best. You don't have to know all 5 that's on this slide right here, but I'm going just to read it out to you. You can use the phrase, I scoped schedule, cost, and quality with resource communications as risk on procurement to stakeholders. The second one is, I suddenly saw crows quite quickly read code and referring to poetic songs. The third one is, integrating scope and schedule will cost our quality resource to communicate with risk of procuring stakeholders. The fourth one is, I suddenly saw cat quick, Romeo can run pretty swiftly. And then the last one is what we saw earlier, and that is, I saw 6 cars quickly wrap Carol's rear passenger side. Well, it's a variation of the one that we saw earlier. Anyway, pick your favorite phrase and use it to help you memorize the 10 knowledge areas. Then next we have the 5 process groups. The 5 process groups are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. And the way that you can use to memorize the 5 process groups is to use this phrase, which is, in physical education, Mary cries constantly. Again, the first letters of this phrase matches with the first letters of the 5 process groups. Okay, so we looked at how to memorize the 5 process groups using this phrase, and we also looked at how to memorize the 10 knowledge areas using one of these phrases, which matches with the same first letters as the 10 knowledge areas. Now, let's take a look at the 49 processes, and it is now that I want to introduce you to the phone number technique. So when we look at how many processes are within each of the 10 knowledge areas, we see that there's 7 processes within integration, 6 within scope, 6 within schedule, and so forth. And what we do when we combine all of these numbers together, we get a phone number, which is 766 436 3734. But please don't call this number. Whomever owns this number might be pretty upset if we send 100 people calling this number all at once. So please don't call this number. Anyway, so what this number serves as is a sanity check for you. So when you go through this chart and you suddenly forgot a specific process, you can use this technique to check and see exactly in which knowledge area you forgot that process in. That could help you jog your memory as to what that process is supposed to be. So now let's look at how to fill in the 49 processes in the chart. The first thing we want to do is to fill in the corners. We can see that there is a process in all 3 corners of the process chart: develop project charter, identify stakeholders, and close project or phase. The only corner that doesn't have a process is the bottom right-hand corner. Once we have our corners filled in, then we can fill in our plan processes. So every single process in the 10 knowledge areas begin with the plan process. So for example, scope management has plan scope management as a process, quality management has plan quality management as a process, risk management has plan risk management as a process. And the reason you have that is that the plan process it's when you're planning out how you're going to do all of the other processes within that knowledge area. So you can just fill in all your plan processes. And the next pattern we see is that in the monitoring controlling process group, each of the processes either begin with a monitor process or a control process. So for example, schedule management has the control schedule process, and communication has the monitor communications process, and stakeholder management has monitor stakeholder engagement as a process. So the first process within each of the knowledge areas inside of monitoring controlling either begin with a monitor or a control process. And you might be wondering, well, how do I know which process begins with monitor and which ones begin with control? Well, to help you with that, I have a little song, quote unquote. I say that very loosely at the bottom of this slide right here, which is MCCCC and MCM. So you can kind of use that rhythm to help you memorize whether it's a monitor or control. Let me say that again. It's MCCCCC MMCM. So it's almost like a cheerleader sort of rhythm song thing at the bottom. So you can kind of use that to help you remember whether it's a monitor process or control. Now, just at this point, we already have half of our chart filled out just by using those 3 simple rules. Unfortunately, there isn't as much pattern in the remainder of the process chart, but what I can tell you is that you want to use logic to then help you connect the dots as to which process comes first and which one comes next. So what we can see from, let's just use scope management as an example here. There's 6 processes within scope. First, you plan out your scope in plan scope management. Then you collect all your requirements from your stakeholders, and then you pick which requirements are going to be included in your project scope and which ones are not. This is when you define your scope. Then once you have your scope defined, you can break that scope down into your WBS or your work breakdown structure. And then once in execution, all this work has been implemented, you want to validate your scope and control your scope. So when you connect the dots of how these different processes work together in order to complete the project and the sequence that they're supposed to happen in, you will logically be able to deduct which processes will follow and be able to remember this chart much faster. I usually don't say that you need to memorize a lot for the PMP exam, because the purpose of the exam is to make sure that you are a certified project manager, so you have everything in your tool belt in order to help you actually do the work when it's a real life situation. And it's not really a memorization exam, but there is some couple things that are really good to have memorized, such as the process chart, because it is really like the skeleton of the PMBOK guide, and the PMBOK really just drills into each of these 49 processes in much more detail, which brings us to our next point, which is the ITTOs, which stands for inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. So this is when we in the PMBOK guide, they will drill into each of these 49 processes and tell you exactly how to complete each of these processes. They're not just going to tell you, okay, this is what you're doing on a high level. So we looked at the high level, the 10,000 feet view, which is this is how the project is going to complete it. Now we need to dive deeper into how do we actually complete each of these processes. And this is when the ITTOs come into place. Let's take a look at an ITTO. One of the processes, let's take plan scope management as an example, so you will understand what I mean. The first thing you want to know about each of these processes is, what is this process supposed to do? So plan scope management is when you determine how the scope is defined, validated, and controlled, and you will document all of this in your scope management plan. Essentially, in this process, you're planning out how you are going to approach all of the other processes within scope management. Now that you know what the process is about, let's take a look at the ITTOs, which again stands for input, tools, and techniques and outputs. So here is the ITTO for plan scope management. We have our inputs, which is our project management plan, project charter, EF, which stands for enterprise environmental factors, and OPA, which stands for organizational process assets. And when you read this chart, what this chart is telling you is how you are going to transform these inputs into the outputs using the tools and techniques. So the analogy I like to use here is cooking. So inputs are your ingredients. So let's say we're baking a cake right now. So your inputs could be flour, eggs, butter, sugar, etc. The tools and techniques is the way that you transform the inputs into the output. So here we can have mixing and baking and stirring, and then the final output that we have is the delicious birthday cake that we built. So when you understand this is how you're supposed to read the ITTO chart, and we know that our end purpose is to create our scopes management plan. So here, what we have is that we're going to use our project management plan, our project charter, our project environment, which is our EF and OPA. Then we're going to use these tools and techniques, which are our expert judgment, data analysis, and meetings. We're going to meet with our experts in meetings and use data analysis in order to create our scope management plan and our requirements management plan. So essentially, the ITTO chart tells you what tools you can use in order to complete this process. It's giving you the recipe for how this process is supposed to be completed. Okay, so now we covered how to read the process chart, how to dissect the ITTOs, and one important thing about the ITTOs is that you do not need to memorize the ITTO chart for all 49 processes. You would drive yourself nuts. There's over 600 of them. I would not recommend it. The point is, when you look at this chart, you have to be able to understand every component and see how each of these components can actually help you achieve the objective of the process. Okay, now that we really covered the backbone of the PMBOK, the next thing I want to cover with you is how to fill in your PMP application. In order to submit your PMP application, the first thing you do is you go on PMI.org, and the first portion of your application is quite mechanical. You just fill in your address, your name, where you went to school, etc., your contact information. If you're writing your CAPM certification, then determining your work experience isn't applicable to you. But if you are writing your PMP certification, then you need to be able to determine how many hours you worked in each of the work experiences. And this can be tricky if your project happened a couple years ago and you didn't track exactly how many hours you have done on each of the tasks. So at this point, you just want to do a high level estimate. So for example, I worked on this project for 1 year. I took a 2-week vacation. So that's 50 weeks. I worked 40 hours a week. So 50 times 40 is 2,000 hours. So I'm going to claim 2,000 hours for this project. As long as the contact person you have for that project agrees with your estimate, then you're good to go. So PMI defines a project as it has a definitive beginning and end and creates a unique product, service, or result. So keeping that definition of a project in mind, then you can pick out which projects fits within that definition of a project and which ones are operational work which will not count towards your PMP exam. So once you have all your projects ready, you are now ready to write your project descriptions, and I'll give you a 3-step formula that will help you pass the PMI audit every single time. You ready? Okay, let's jump into it. So here is the winning formula to writing your project descriptions. So the first sentence should briefly describe the project and your role on the project, and I'll give you an example of this right after this as well. The second to sixth sentence should describe the task you have done within each of the 5 process groups. So if you have claimed hours for all 5 of the process groups, then you need 1 sentence for each of those 5 process groups to describe what task you have done within that process group. And then the third step is to briefly describe the outcome of the project. Now, when you are writing your PMP application descriptions, you have to be really careful to use PMI terminologies. I know you might use other terms on your project, but because you're writing your PMP application right now, so you have to use the terminologies within the PMBOK guides, because this is going to indicate to PMI that you understand their methodology. So here are some sample terminologies within each of the 5 process groups and terms that you can use to describe what you have done. And so in the past, I've seen students say, I initiated the project, then I planned the project, then I executed the project, then I monitored and controlled the project to ensure everything went smoothly, then I closed the project. And that's not really what PMI is looking for. They're looking for you to use a specific task within each of these 5 process groups to demonstrate to them that you actually understand what is going on. So now let me give you an example of a great description and a bad description. I'm going to give you the example of the bad description first. And by the way, these are real descriptions that some of our past students have submitted. So let's go into the before version. So this person wrote, this project is an ongoing project where I am required to be part of the initiating stages, extensively input during the planning stages, fully responsible for the execution of the project, partly responsible controlling and closing out the projects. The project varied from network planning to new software development. I am responsible for ensuring that all internally developed and outsourced mission critical applications within the organization are operational at all times and required to design, build, test, and deploy new applications. So first of all, who understood what actually happened on this project? Because I certainly didn't. This is like a lot of really long sentences that doesn't tell me what is happening in this project at all. This person is saying that I did everything and nothing at the same time. So we help this person to clean up this description, and this is what it looked like after. And this person did go on to submit their application